This video is sponsored by Skillshare. Do you have one of these laying around? Like this kind specifically? A Polaroid land camera that looks like this. I don't mean one of these, or these, and not this one either, actually. Also specifically, like maybe a manual one. I mean, automatic ones are probably fine, but they're not going to be as good for this. The manual ones are better. You know what? Wait, let's restart. This is a Polaroid land camera, and these kinds of cameras originally took peel-apart instant pack film, which doesn't really exist anymore. Okay, well, good pack film doesn't really exist anymore. But what if you could use some of these cameras with a film that was cheap-ish and readily available? That's where the Instax Square EXO by Lo-Fi and DIY comes in. It's a custom-made modification for these folding Polaroid land cameras, which allows you to shoot Fuji's Instax Square film with them. The idea behind the EXO is that it's kind of like an exoskeleton for the land camera, like that thing from Aliens, or that thing Matt Damon wore in Elysium, if you remember Elysium, or Edge of Tomorrow, actually, that's another good one. It's an attachment that can go onto the land camera without permanently altering or damaging any part of it. For using the EXO, I have a wonderful Polaroid 180 land camera which someone sent me. The appeal of the 180 is that it's entirely manual. On the front of the lens are the controls for setting both your aperture and shutter speed of the camera, whereas a lot of other land camera models are entirely automatic exposure. The Instax back itself is a solid 3D printed piece which contains a motor for ejecting the Instax photo. It takes two CR2 batteries on the bottom and then has a button that you hold down for ejecting. Unlike regular Instax cameras though, this will continue running for as long as you hold down the button. So you want to stop once your film is out, or you could accidentally start ejecting the next shot in your pack. The rest of the EXO are the little pieces which go on the front and top of the camera. To attach this to the land camera, the pin on the original hinge of the film door needs to be removed so that the entire door can then be taken off of the camera. This takes a bit of work, but is pretty straightforward. There are two caps at the top and bottom of the pin which need to be pulled off, and then the pin can be pulled out entirely. I've already removed the top cap, so I'm removing the bottom one and then the entire pin. This lets you completely remove the film door and put the Instax back on in place of it. Then the pin is reinserted. Now this sort of arm assembly will go onto the top of the camera. This helps to secure the top part of the Instax back, and the arm will lock the camera's focus into place to be accurate for shooting with the new back. Because the Instax film sits further back than where the pack film originally would have, the focus would be off if I just used it as normal. The plastic arm piece locks the front of the camera at the proper point where the focus should still be correct. You can still adjust the focus, but it's basically just shifted things back a bit to work with the new distance of the film. There's also a piece that goes on the bottom so that the camera can sit on a surface and not fall forward. And with these new components, you're able to just load up some Instax Square film and start shooting with one of these old cameras. So far, all of these have worked out, and it's a lot of fun to use this thing. Instax film is also very, very contrasty, so Trying to nail the exposure on all of this is a little tricky, and I'm just kind of using a light meter app on my phone. There's about a stop and a half difference from this one to this one. This one is of flowers that I was standing, I want to say like 5 feet away from. The key to framing on this is frame everything kind of wide in the center of the frame, of the viewfinder of the camera, and then shift everything a little bit, like take a step to your right, I think. This one is also at like f30, f28. It's between 22 and 32 on this camera, and I'm shooting at 1/25th of a second right now, so that I'm kind of in like the middle area of the aperture values for the lens to try to kind of keep things sharp. When I did a couple around f11, I found that the focus was kind of soft, so I guess it gets like the fall off starts to really happen. This thing goes up to f90. I'm like 20 shots in, but I think I'm finally starting to get a handle on like exposure and framing. But that's the joy of the Instax stuff. It is so cheap that I can kind of burn through more of it than I would want to do with especially just like Polaroid film. I just double exposed by accident. I took one and then didn't eject it and was walking for a bit more and then just took another. So I double exposed but didn't intend to or expose the way that you would expose for double exposures. I'd like to thank Skillshare for sponsoring this video today, and I'm going to tell you about Skillshare in about the time that it takes for this Instax to develop. Are you confused about some of the concepts that I mentioned in today's video which I didn't fully flesh out? Well, Skillshare has courses for that, like double exposure. Skillshare is the largest online learning community for creatives with thousands of classes led by industry experts across film, illustration, design, freelance, productivity, and more. Skillshare can help you take your career, skills, hobbies, passions, or other side hustles to the next level. After a long, cold, dark gray Toronto winter, I always feel the most energized to start new projects and learn new skills as we enter the hot, humid, disgusting Toronto summer months. Recently, my roommate moved out, and I want to buy a new couch, but couches are so expensive. Luckily, Skillshare has me covered, kind of. I can take this course on how to 3D model a couch for beginners in Blender by Ken Umbes, which is great because I don't know anything about Blender. But now I'll be able to envision a fully realized couch that I might like to buy by creating it first in the digital realm. And then maybe I'll take a class on augmented reality, such as this one by Darren Booth, so then I can envision that 3D couch in this space and put it here. I plan to make the most out of my summer by 3D modeling couches, and I encourage you to do the same through Skillshare. Now let's check back in on that Instax. The first 500 people to use my link in the description will receive a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. Get started today. The Instax Square EXO is available on the Instant Madness eBay store for $450 American. This price is only for the EXO itself and does not include a camera. For transparency, the EXO and the 180 camera that I used here were sent to me by a longtime fan of the channel, Tony. It's a niche product and it is being made by an individual on a small scale, so I understand the price tag, but I do think that it's probably really only going to appeal to like Instax and instant film diehards, as opposed to the more casual kind of person who might have lucked into one of these cameras at a thrift store. It's in good condition. They're just hoping to be able to still use it in some way. And overall, I think it is like a lot of fun. The design is very creative and it works really well, especially like having the motor built into the back. And I think a big part of it being so fun, as I mentioned, is the fact that Instax square film is cheap enough that you are not really afraid of like burning through some shots just to kind of get a hang of it. But there are some awkward kind of things about the EXO. First of all, yes, Instax square film is a little bit smaller than pack film. So you're losing a little bit of the area that you see in the viewfinder when you're framing. You do kind of get used to it just as you start shooting with it and get an idea of how much you're losing and how to compensate for that different frame size. But probably for most people, they're not going to really want to be shooting Instax square with a conversion like this, and Instax wide in theory is probably more appealing. And I do think that Lo-Fi and DIY is working on an Instax wide version of this, but at the time of this video right now, it's not available. Having the EXO on the camera though does impact a few of the functions of it, and the convenience definitely. The bottom piece prevents me from using it on a tripod. I can place it down on a flat surface and there is this hole here, but it isn't threaded or anything. And certain accessories might not work properly. This close-up set, for example, uses a piece that clips onto the viewfinder, and you can't attach this because of the Instax unit. I could probably modify the viewfinder piece to attach if I really wanted to, just kind of like shave down the edges of it. But keep in mind that if you're using this, then certain things just might not fit because of the EXO. The biggest inconvenience, however, is that the arm assembly prevents the camera from closing easily, making it pretty bulky and awkward to put in a bag or travel with. Installing the arm isn't necessarily difficult, but it does involve a few screws and it can be a little fiddly and takes a minute or two, so having to take it on and off every time you take a shot isn't the most appealing solution. There is also no film counter on the back like on normal Instax cameras, so you'll want to keep track of how many shots you've taken. And specifically, you're gonna want to be using a folding camera like this with the bellows. There are like the hard body plastic land cameras that you cannot use like a modification like this on one of those really cheap ones. Really the big appeal of doing this is still being able to use these cameras, but it's also just giving you a lot more flexibility, or at least more, unique kind of creative results at times, as opposed to just like using a Fuji Instax square camera. This is the SQ1 and it is a very, very basic camera. It turns on and it has a selfie mode to change the focus with a little mirror at the front. And that is about it. It has a built-in flash. There is no like exposure compensation control. This one can't do double exposures. So it's just like a more versatile, more kind of like opens up a variety of ways to shoot Instax film. As I showed off, using the Polaroid 180 model or a few of the other similar manual Polaroid land camera folding models is really ideal for a situation like this. If you're using this on a camera that has automatic exposure, then it becomes a little trickier because usually those cameras just let you choose the film ISO, and back then it was either 80 ISO for color film or 3000 ISO for black and white film that Polaroid was making. So you have to try to play around with getting a good exposure by using one of those options. You could set it to 80 ISO and then use like an ND filter over the light meter that's on those cameras and explore playing around with the compensation dial that's on the front as well. It's not impossible, but Instax film is 800 ISO, and that really needs to be knocked down quite a bit if your camera is exposing at 80 ISO. So it's gonna take a lot of experimenting, I think. I do like though that because this is an Instax back, you're getting images that are not like flipped or mirrored. Instax film exposes through the back of the film so that when you look at the front of it, it is the proper orientation. But For comparison, Polaroid film exposes directly onto the front of it, which is why Polaroid cameras have a mirror in them and Instax cameras don't. So if you were taking a picture of a sign or something with lettering using a back like this that took Polaroid film, then it would eject and you would look at it and the letters would be backwards. Whereas Instax film doesn't have this issue. There is a project that is trying to do that though. It's called the New Land Camera Project, and at the time of making this video it's not available yet, but it is a back for folding land cameras that is basically this same kind of thing. As opposed to taking Instax square film though, it takes Polaroid integral film. So Polaroid I-type, 600 or SX70 film. It doesn't have a motor in it, it is instead hand cranked, so you wind the crank and it ejects the film and then you kind of pull it out. There was a Kickstarter campaign for that, and I believe that whoever behind that is still offering like a lot of updates, and you can find all of that on the Instagram for that. And it looks like that project is hopefully going to be released sometime soon, but at the time of making this video, I don't know what the price tag of that's going to be, so I don't know how it's going to compare to the EXO. Lo-Fi and DIY puts out a variety of 3D printed options for using Instax formats and other somewhat obscure formats sometimes on like a pretty big variety of cameras. In the past, I've done a video on this Instax wide back that he has put out that goes on the even older Polaroid roll film cameras. And I like this a lot too. These cameras are maybe a little bit more awkward to work with, but shooting Instax wide on this is a lot of fun. So you can find that eBay store, which is linked in the description below. It's called Instant Madness, and you can also find a link to the Lo-Fi and DIY blog as well. This is a lot of fun, and I love the variety of ways within like the analog filmmaking and photography world that people are using 3D printing or just combination of new media, new materials in order to kind of combine them with older cameras and older processes. But again, I really do think that it's probably a bit of a niche within a niche and is going to be kind of more appealing to people who are really, really into Instax or really, really into Instax Square specifically, if there are people who are just really like in love with that format specifically, as opposed to just like the casual person who has picked one of these up and is looking to be able to still use it. Thank you so much for checking this out. You can find links in the description down below or at the side if YouTube is rolling out its new layout lately, which looks terrible. You can find information for the Lo-Fi and DIY website and the Instant Madness eBay store that he runs. And you can also find ways of supporting the channel. There's a Patreon, there's a little bit of merch, there's some stuff there that just kind of helps me kind of keep this going and pay for rent and buy film and do these videos. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you soon.